In 4 days' time, the United States of America will, for the 59th time in its history, choose a president. 44 men have served as America's commander-in-chief. Many have, rightly or wrongly, slipped from the memory of society. Some, meanwhile, are revered historical figures, not just in America's history, but in the world's. A global history of the last 2 centuries will be left not with gaps, but with chasms, without paying reference to figures like Washington and Lincoln and Jefferson and Roosevelt and Kennedy and Reagan and Obama. And the list could well go on. As the most powerful country on earth, the selection of an American head of state has become one of the most important events, not just in America, but around the world. And as America's politics have become increasingly polarized over the last 2 decades, international onlookers have watched whilst growing increasingly close to the edge of their seat. And so, as one such onlooker, I feel compelled to speak directly to any Americans who might come across this video. But more than that, as one who has had a lifelong fascination with American politics, and who has come even from afar to revere its institutions of government, its founding principles, its constitution, and its remarkable story. A story of how it threw aside regression and oppression imposed upon it by my own country, how it cast aside a cruel, malignant, and illegitimate monarchy that my own country remains saddled with, and instead cleaved to what is now an unremarkable view, but one that was at the time a radical view, that all men are created equal. And even if in its 2 decades since America has fallen all too short of that lofty ideal, it has spent those 2 centuries moving closer to it. Sometimes with great bursts of progress, other times with a long, slow march, but almost always moving towards and not away from a more perfect union. The moral arc always being all too long, but always bending towards justice. And then there's Donald Trump. This election isn't about politics. It's not about policy. It's not about what you think the tax rate should be set at. It's not whose education plan you think is the best. It's about, do you want to live in a republic governed by the rule of law, or don't you? Do you want a president who will be president of all people, and not just those who aren't mean to him? Think about all the great people who have sat in the Oval Office throughout America's history. Think of the dignity of a Washington, the intelligence of a Jefferson, the justice of a Lincoln, the fortitude of a Roosevelt, the charisma of a Kennedy, or the patriotism of a Reagan or an Obama. That office has been debased and disgraced by a man who has no use for it or America's history, who thinks it is the country's job to serve him, rather than his job to serve the country. A man who has trampled over the rule of law, who treats the White House as little more than an ATM machine, who holds up a Bible with one hand and pays hush money to porn stars with the other. America has had great leaders and it has had poor leaders. It has been through successes and failures. It has been responsible for some of humanity's greatest crimes and some of its most remarkable achievements. But it has never, ever had someone like Donald Trump as its president. Over the past 4 years, the president has consistently pitted one side of the country against the other, and has deeply entrenched inequality across the board, not just in terms of race or gender or economics, but those who have power now have a tighter grip on it than almost ever before, and those who don't have it have scarcely looked farther from it. Trump's presidency has seen him bend over backwards to placate and accommodate hostile foreign powers, anybody who can help put more power in his hands and more money in his pockets. He has made great friendships with dictators and scorned America's allies because alliances are of no use to him. He views the world through a solely transactional lens, for whom one's net worth is all they're worth. A man who knows the price of everything and the value of nothing. He attempted to blackmail a foreign leader into providing dirt on Joe Biden, and has previously in the past spoken of imprisoning his political opponents. He has incited violence against those who have opposed him, gassed the citizens that he was supposed to protect, all for nothing more than a photo op, and sent federal troops into cities managed by his political opponents, as well as launching countless attacks on Americans and the parts of America that aren't supportive of him. And too many instances to name of attacks on Americans of color, women, the disabled, the poor, and anyone who falls outside the perimeters of what he thinks an American ought to be, namely unwaveringly loyal to him. And he has done all of this, all of it, while putting your money in his pocket, presiding over the most corrupt administration in almost a century. In all, Trump has put almost $1 million of your tax money into his pocket, including $200,000 of the military budget. And that number isn't getting any smaller. A further $5 million have come his way from the coffers of the Republican Party itself. And even more money has flowed into his businesses from the corporate lobbyists and foreign leaders who have stayed in his hotel in DC. The same corporate lobbyists who literally helped write the budget-annihilating tax bill that acted as a massive payday for Wall Street and little else. The Oval Office once symbolized America's highest ideals. It was home to people who, flawed as they all were, often represented the best of America. Today it is occupied by someone who represents the worst of it. I know how difficult it is when you feel the system isn't working for you, and it certainly isn't. How easy it can be to give in to the temptation to abandon hope and to cast aside that most important civic obligation of engaging with the democratic process to work towards that more perfect union. But right now, your primary representative to the world is a narcissistic, self-obsessed traitor to America's ideals, a dictatorial, authoritarian enemy of the rule of law and to liberal democracy as we know it, a racist, sexist, lecherous pervert. For all that America is often criticized by other countries, as often as its idiosyncrasies are mocked at best, and its warmongering and empire building are criticized and attacked at worst, I still believe that America in so many ways represents our highest political ideals. If you are an American voter and you hear this message, if you take one thing away from it, let it be this: you are a better country and a better people than your president would lead anybody to believe. Don't listen to his message that your neighbor is your enemy, that those of differing political opinions are your enemy, that African Americans campaigning to be treated with justice are your enemy, that immigrants are your enemy, that those who worship differently to you are your enemy. Your enemy is the one who lines his own pockets under the pretense of serving you, who entrenches his own power and the power of those like him while leaving ordinary Americans less empowered, with less control over their own destiny, who whines and complains and spares no thought for the hundreds of thousands of families devastated by the pandemic that he has so appallingly mismanaged. And if you don't want to listen to my words, that's fine. I understand. But if nothing else, at least hear these words. We are not enemies, but friends. We must not be enemies. Though passion may have strained, it must not break our bonds of affection. The mystic chords of memory, stretching from every battlefield and patriot grave to every living heart and hearthstone all over this broad land, will yet swell the chorus of the Union, when again touched, as surely they will be, by the better angels of our nature. Abraham Lincoln. Stay centered, my friends.